Hello, and welcome to I Hate Talking, a podcast about talking, including etymology, frustrating topics, current events, and other random subjects. I'm Adam.
And I'm Steph. We are married, and we invite you into these discussions with us as we talk about the good and the bad of talking.
We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
What am I doing?
Well, we could do a word or phrase of the episode. What word or phrase of the episode are you thinking of?
I have no idea, and I have no idea who I'm talking to. Are we recording or not recording?
We are recording.
Oh, then who am I talking to?
You are talking to all of the audience that listens to our podcast.
How many would that be?
At least 6 people.
I know a phrase for the thing.
You know a phrase for the thing? What phrase for the podcast would you like to share?
Chicken wing.
Chicken wing. So our word or phrase of this episode is chicken wing. So would you care to tell our audience what the phrase chicken wing means?
I don't know. I just came up with it.
So is it a particular food or is it a name of an animal that we possess?
It's our pet chicken and a food.
So it is both. Both a food that you could eat, a chicken wing, as well as a pet that we have, chicken wing.
Why are we doing this in your clothes closet?
This is our studio.
Why are you in the clothes closet and I'm in your room?
Well, there's not very much room in the clothes closet, so we have to spread out a bit.
So why do you call it a studio?
Because this is where we do all our podcast recording.
Why don't you just call it a clothes closet?
Well, that doesn't sound very professional.
A studio is not exactly telling it the truth of what you're doing it in.
That is a very astute observation. So now we know, and all of our audience knows, that our studio, quote unquote, is actually a clothing closet.
So why don't you just call it clothing closet?
Well, I guess we will from now on. If there's anything else that you would like to share about the word or phrase chicken wing.
I don't know what chicken means. The first thing that popped into my head.
Well, then there you have it. So we have chicken wing as either the food that we eat, which is the wing of a chicken, which is cooked. And then we also have chicken wing as the name of our pet, which is very appropriate because that pet is actually a chicken.
Chicken wing, hot dog and a donut. Chicken wing, hot dog and a donut.
There we go. All right. Anything else you would like to say before we end this recording?
No, may I take off these headphones and leave?
You may take off these headphones and leave. Thanks for being here. All right. So after that short intro with our word or phrase of the episode, we are here with episode 16 of I Hate Talking.
Hi, everyone.
So now, considering that we've already engaged our word or phrase of the episode, we will move into our topic, which actually will be a continuation of our topic from last time on money and money dysmorphia, inflation, and perhaps we'll get into more concrete things that one could do to endure during this economic season with some personal budgets and personal consumption strategies with regards to inflation and perhaps even money dysmorphia.
I think this topic is very important, but also it's probably my most hated topic.
So why do you hate talking about money?
We could go into a whole bunch of psychology probably. But overall, when we start talking about budgets and like our personal finance, I can definitely feel anxious and stressed, even if it's a positive net or anything like that. Just actually sitting down and seeing real numbers just makes it very stressful and also shows me how out of control I really am in the situation.
Indeed. And in the modern day banking system, they are just numbers on a screen. And that is something that we'll actually consider as one of the strategies in terms of actually handling real dollars to make it more real.
Sounds great.
The other thing that you mentioned is in terms of the control that you mentioned. So what is it in particular that is out of control?
Right. After I said that, I realized maybe it sounds like I'm out of control with my spending. And I don't think I am. Once in a while, I enjoy a little bit of retail therapy, but I do think I stick pretty well to our budgets. What's out of my control is just the cost of life. Like, I know we can cut back on things, but as a whole, when I compare a lot of what we do and how we live compared to our peers, I don't think we're living an extravagant life, but that I see those numbers in our bank going away. So that's what's just stressful, is just I don't like seeing those numbers go away when I know we still have to pay our insurance and we still have to pay our groceries and our gas, etc.
Exactly. And the topic for this particular episode will be more focused on those things that we can attempt to control with regards to budgets and spending and maybe even income generation, and not so much on the things that are outside of our control, though we have touched on those things previously with regards to inflation and central banks and fiscal policy that does impact the everyday citizen, and perhaps that will be a topic for a future episode. Nor will we really delve into a lot of specifics or strategies around investments, although that is a core part and critical part of personal wealth management. We're going to be instead focusing more during this episode on budgets and personal consumption in terms of those things that perhaps we can control, rather than those things that are technically outside of our control but still need to have consideration and make sure that we understand those things.
Right. So a lot of maybe just down to the practical, what do we do and how do we budget or look at the money we have in our hands?
Exactly. And the money going out of our hands, because to your point earlier, our standard of living has not changed, but the cost of living has increased. So we are seeing that outflow at a faster pace than the income generation that we alluded to last time, in terms of cost of goods rising while real wages are not rising at the same rate. And that perhaps that could be, like we talked about, some people may be going into debt or living paycheck to paycheck, or just not putting away as much into savings as they may desire.
Yep, sounds great.
So we did mention a few concrete things that one can do in our last episode. One of those things was the avoidance, or at least awareness of the impact of social media. So not only from comparing oneself to the supposed wealth of those that you see within social media and those influencers, but also to avoid advertisements that may generate impulse buying habits for things that you don't necessarily need while you're on those social media sites. So that is number one. And we talked about that a little bit last time. And I will share one particular specific strategy that I think has helped me with that, and that is app limits. So how much time I allow that application to be open on my phone. And for example, for most of these social media applications, for example, Facebook is set to 1 minute per day.
So do you think that you really only spend 1 minute?
So I can override it, and it does allow me to override it to 15 minutes if I so choose to do that. But if I do strictly adhere to the 1 minute, which I often do, but not always, that will give me enough time to look at my notifications, perhaps scroll a little bit to see what is on the top of my feed, or if there's any particular important posts that are related to people that I actually know rather than these ads or influencers that seem to have inundated our social media feeds as of late.
Right. You had that on my phone for a while. I think I had 15 minutes a day. But like you said, you can override it. So I would just override it. But then I would have guilt. So not only am I doing something unhealthy by spending a lot of time on Facebook, I'm also now having the guilt of the fact I overrode my time.
And you can make that, I believe, so that it is a hard limit or would require a password to be entered so that there is a little bit more of a barrier to overriding that limit. The other thing that I think that you've had more success with is uninstalling the actual application and instead having to go through a browser to get to these social media sites.
Yeah, that's what I do that has worked, because that little pop-up window offering an extended time is easy to click on. But when I uninstall the apps and then I don't save the password in my browser, it takes a lot longer because I have to type in my email. I have to type in my passwords to log into anything. And then within that amount of time, I'm like, oh, I don't really need to go on here anyways. And so similar to you, like I'm able to set up in the morning, go in, check my notifications, and be done.
Precisely. So perhaps some strategies that our listeners can adopt if that is something that you find helpful in terms of, one, not only avoiding undue comparisons to others through what you see on social media from social influencers or even your own peers in terms of what they might be doing for a short period of time, but again, not knowing all the ins and outs of their financial situation, as well as avoiding those opportunities where you're going to be faced with a impulse purchase from various ads that you will receive within those social media sites.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we talked about and really only briefly touched on is a budget. So the importance of having a budget and, as you've already stated, sticking to that budget and being aware when we are under budget or over budget and making the necessary adjustments to that is a critical part of making sure that one can endure the economic woes that seem to be before us, as well as just in general do well with money from the perspective of avoiding overconsumption and managing savings and your own personal wealth.
I don't like budgets, but I also think that they're a necessary evil. And for me, I do well when I have a budget. If I have a limited amount of money, obviously we don't, but like if I don't have a cap, then I'm much more likely to be like, oh, treat yourself. Let's go to Starbucks. Let's go. Oh, this is on sale. Let's pick it up. And that kind of thing. Where when I have a strict budget, I know that even if that's on sale, it's not in the budget, so I can't get it.
Exactly. So having those flexibilities within the budget is a good thing as well, which I think is a good segue into some resources that we want to recommend to our listeners. So there's two particular books that I think have been formative in my understanding of budgets and financial management within probably more of my later adult years as of recently. And that is a book called The Barefoot Investor, which is by Scott Pape. And in the Audible version, which like we've talked about in previous episodes, that has been one of the ways that I've consumed books as of more recently within the last decade or so, rather than reading the physical book. It's actually narrated by the author. So this is one of the cases where I had to slow down the author, not only because I think authors read their own books a little bit more quickly. They're not also trained to be narrators, as well as the fact that he is not from the U.S.
Oh, where's he from?
So he is, I believe, from Australia. So you will get the enjoyment or disenjoyment, depending on if you listen to this, of having the author read it in his Australian accent.
Oh, I like those.
And because he is from Australia, a lot of this is very applicable to how we manage money in the United States, but not 100%. So that is something to keep in mind if you do read this book. And one of the things that I think I've come to the conclusion on within even the last year or so is that part of being successful in life is boiling things down to heuristics and having your own heuristics. Basically, how do you behave in a certain situation, or how do you behave if a particular thing is true or not true? So having the heuristic of what you do with your money, to boil this down to a personal heuristic from this book, is having buckets within your budget.
That you put like Dave Ramsey has like a similar idea, I'm assuming, right? He does the envelopes where you put like, you separate out your money, right? Is that what his buckets are? You put your money in different buckets?
It is to some degree similar to Dave Ramsey, which I think Dave Ramsey has some good ideas on money management. I think intrinsically he and I will differ greatly on the use of debt and the leveraging of debt, where that's something that he supposedly never does. But I think there are certain situations where you can leverage debt for your own benefit. But nonetheless, on the money thing, I think that is similar. And again, that I think from the Ramsey perspective, they actually encourage people to have that physical money within the envelope so that you can handle it, see it, and have a more tactile interaction with the money rather than just numbers on the screen or swiping a credit card or even swiping a debit card. But I think Ramsey gets down into a little bit more detail in terms of rent and groceries and very specific items within those envelopes, which I think you would probably need to do with the physical money. The idea from Scott Pape is more of generalized buckets. So here are your buckets for perhaps a bucket for just daily living expenses, a bucket for vacations, a bucket for savings, and maybe you'll have within some of those buckets sub-buckets where you're doing investments or you're doing things that are just in a cash account, in a savings account, and things of that nature, but very much more generalized buckets in terms of where you are directing your money and how you're budgeting it accordingly.
Okay. So he doesn't have actual like 6 buckets in his closet that he's putting money in. It's more like if he has a spreadsheet, he has a column for that.
Yes, they're not physical buckets. It's just a euphemism for having separate categories of the funds.
How do you figure out what categories to have?
So he gives you the specific categories. I guess you could choose to follow them or not follow them with regards to actually doing those buckets. But basically, a lot of his strategies are around making sure that you're sticking to those things, basically how you manage your house debt if you have a mortgage, how impacting your financial situation is impacted by kids or other family members that are interacting with you. So lots of different scenarios are addressed in this book as well in terms of maybe wherever you are within your lifespan with just starting out or kids or empty nesters or even retirees that can all apply some of these generalized steps.
And you said there was a second book?
So the second book is Tony Robbins' book, which is called Money, Master the Game. And this one you do have to read with a grain of salt or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 maybe, because about half of the book is an advertisement for his additional tools and money management things that he has online and additional books and seminars and things of that nature. But he does, I think, do a lot of
Coal walks.
Hmm?
He's the guy who does the coal walks, right?
I think he is the guy that does the coal walks.
Yeah.
So that would be the content of one of his seminars if you were to attend. But nonetheless, within this book, I think he actually does address a lot of things about confidence with money. So not only necessarily maybe some specific tactics or strategies in terms of how to manage your money, but also some of just the conceptual and psychological things with confidence around money, as well as not being anxious with money and budgeting.
Oh, interesting.
And then there also have been a number of books that I, again, have also read over the last few years that have been formative, but those are more in the vein of fiscal policy, monetary investing, and things of that nature. So probably not applicable to this podcast in general, but again, understanding how money works, I think, does bring greater insight in terms of how you manage your own household budget and consumption.
In your opinion, then, obviously, we can't give financial advice. That's not either of our jobs. But in your opinion, would you hold off investing then until you have your monthly household budget under control?
So I think you would want to not go full tilt on investing. What I mean by that is that you wouldn't want to necessarily have your own brokerage account or do your own stock picking or do option trading until you are well established within your own budget. But I think the caveat to that is that there are certain things that can maximize your income potential based on, like, for example, a employer match 401k. So those are things that I would personally take advantage of and would recommend our listeners to take advantage of, is that if your employer has something like that, it is essentially free money because they are matching what you are putting in to a certain point. A lot of those things do have vestment timelines, so you do have to be at that company for a certain amount of period of time to realize all those gains that they are helping you achieve by inputting additional money beyond just your own. And I think you can do those basic investments while you're still figuring out your own personal budget and financial monetary plan.
Okay. But if your company doesn't offer that, you're not saying run out and start putting into a 401k right now.
It would depend exactly on perhaps how much money you have in those different buckets. So if your personal expenses are taken care of, I would say that it probably would be better to either donate some of that money or invest some of that money or save some of that money rather than just blowing all of your disposable income on unnecessary items.
I don't know what movie this is. I just saw a clip from it recently and it cracked me up. This couple's talking to a professional and she's telling him, like, you're broke. And they're like, no, look right here. We have $4,001. And he's like, that's a 401k. That's not your money you have in your bank.
Yep, definitely not $401,000. So an interesting thing that personally I do that is maybe a non-standard way of budgeting that I think may be insightful is that I will create our budget based on pay periods rather than a monthly budget.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a little bit different. Most people have a monthly budget. They will budget accordingly to typically their costs, which are going to be rent or mortgage, is going to be car insurance or other things that are usually on a monthly basis, like utilities, gas, electric, water, etc., and budget accordingly for those particular costs. When what I do is actually budget based on income, so based on a 2-week pay period, budgeting costs associated within those 2 weeks.
So do you pay the mortgage every 2 weeks, or are you setting some money aside in our account for the mortgage to be paid monthly?
So we will set aside the money either in savings if the mortgage payment is, a little ways out, or just let it sit within our checking account if that particular expense is coming up, so that that money is held in liquid cash for those upcoming expenses.
Do you think the way that you do it maybe helps? Like the stereotype, right, is that it's the end of the month and everyone's out of money. They have to wait till the beginning of the month again, right, to get the money.
It could be. This was actually something that I learned from a coworker many, many years ago that did the same thing. And I think that is a fringe benefit of what this particular style of budgeting does, is it forces you to look at upcoming expenses and generate actually that cushion so that you have the money to pay for those upcoming expenses. And, none of those are necessarily going to be exact dollar amounts, right? Your utilities will change from month to month, but your rent and mortgage should be relatively stable until the redo of the escrow comes around and you see that your property taxes went up. But nonetheless, it does, I think, give you maybe a little bit longer time range to see what your upcoming expenses are beyond just staying within the current month that you're in and not really considering where you're at by the end of the month, or where you be at for the next month, as well as trying to determine when those expenses are going to be due, which in the modern day and age, you actually can move those around. So that probably is not as much of a difficulty, but it does make a difference in terms of when the pay periods hit, because those will change month to month based on a typical 2-week pay period.
Right. I mean, there was something bigger one-off purchase we needed to make recently. And so I checked with you first, like, are we good? Should I buy it? And you did ask, like, well, can it wait till next week? I was like, well, no, it's due before that. And you're like, okay, then buy it now. Because we had the cushion. We knew we needed to buy this, pay for this item. But I think you would have preferred if we pushed it back a week because we would have had that next paycheck, right?
We would have either had that next paycheck. In that specific example, we were a few days away from closing our credit card statement, our monthly time period for our credit card statement. So in that particular scenario, if we had been able to wait just a few more days, it would have rolled into the next monthly statement period for that particular credit card and would have given us actually another 30 days to pay that particular expense.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The other thing that doing this budgeting method does is that for at least 2 months out of the year, you will typically end up with a quote-unquote extra paycheck, which I guess this probably happens for those that do the monthly budgeting as well. But because you're tracking expenses on a every other week period, that money is actually not really allocated to a particular expense. So that can go into savings or can be a extra cushion if you need to catch up on things, as well as maybe just another opportunity to pay off debt. What the particular person that I'm thinking of that introduced me to this concept, they would take that extra paycheck and put that directly and entirely to their mortgage statement.
Okay. Forgive my naivety, but how are you having 2 extra paychecks a year?
So there are 12 months in the year and 26 pay periods in the year. So on average, you will have 2 pay periods per month. But if you'll notice, that does not come out evenly, and you'll have 2 extra checks in that 26 pay period method with the 12 months of the year.
Is that because, I think you typically get paid on Fridays, right? Like that's the average here in the States for every other Friday or so. So because occasionally there's a 5th Friday in the month, is that how we get extra paychecks?
Yep, exactly. So I guess it doesn't happen every fifth Friday, but 2 out of the 4 fifth Fridays would be your extra paycheck.
Okay. So, but you have to be smart when you're thinking this way, because conversely, you could be like, woohoo, I get this extra money. I'm going to go on vacation, or I'm going to buy that couch I want, right? Like, it's not free money. This is money you worked for, and this is money that you need to use wisely, right?
Exactly. So that does bring us perhaps to the final point that we'll make for this particular episode. And there's actually an entire section that we didn't get to. So this actually 2-part series may have just turned into 3-part series.
My most hated topic. It just continues on and on and on.
It does. And this is actually at the request of a couple of different listeners as well that we that had requested additional information on this. So it's not just you that is dealing with perhaps this hated topic, but those that either hate it or are enjoying it and maybe are seeking to learn more about it. But our last thing that we'll mention on this one is going back to that anxiety issue in terms of how we deal with money. And when you establish those buckets and those budgets, hopefully that is one of the ways that can reduce that anxiety, because you cannot be 100% concerned all the time with your income and expenses, because that will be very anxious filled. But you do want to enjoy the fruits of your labor to some degree in terms of taking that vacation or spending money on something that you do want and have thought about, and it is not a frivolous expense, but you've thought about it and have waited and you still desire to purchase this particular item, that there needs to not be guilt associated with that, but by having these budgets and these buckets, that you can do your best in terms of actually enjoying that particular thing that you're purchasing and not feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really been helpful for us, is using this bucket loosely like we do. We have one for holidays and for birthdays. I love birthdays. I love making everyone's birthday special if I can. I like even giving family and friends gifts or treating them to something. So since we have this like money and it just goes to it, it's helpful versus when we didn't have that before. Christmas would come around and we didn't have much money saved, and it was super stressful to like do all these activities and give gifts and stuff like that. And then on a selfish note, my birthday is a little bit after Christmas, and then everyone's poor in January and doesn't have money to go out and do stuff. So I had to tell you one day, like, this is actually important to me. On my birthday, I want to go to dinner, or I want something like that. It's not like I have to get a gift, but like bring me flowers, or let's get a babysitter and go to dinner. So allotting, like putting that money aside and knowing that we have this that we can gift to other people or fun stuff for ourselves has been nice versus just coming up and feeling that stress when it shows up.
Exactly. So a number of potentially concrete things that one could implement, as well as different strategies that we've touched on. And so that hopefully our listeners find that insightful. So from your friends at I Hate Talking, until next time, remember, it is only through talking that we begin the journey to understanding.